regarding the seal, the deal, and the nuclear issue. Ariane?
Thank you, Ram. Thank you, Bob. I would like to start by thanking the Coalition for all the amazing work you've been doing. Naomi reminded us a number of times this morning that little knowledge is dangerous, and that is something that we can clearly see today with the situation, with the nuclear negotiations with Iran. And I think that Bob and the Coalition are doing an amazing job doing education work, trying to bring more understanding to this issue. The Swedish foreign minister, who was in DC, I think last week, left the United States saying that he thinks that those who are informed about the situation with Iran are endorsing a deal, but he's worried about those who don't know, about the misinformation. And that is something that I see very clearly in DC. It seems like a lot of people are going in with a lot of misperceptions that they don't really want to change, even though it's been about a year and a half now that the negotiations have been conducted in broad daylight. And yet there are a number of cliches that we hear over and over again. And I would like to address some of those today. But let me start by updating you a little bit about what is going on with the talks. As we speak, Secretary Kerry, Lady Ashton, and Foreign Minister Zarif are meeting in Oman. They started meeting yesterday. And the deadline for a comprehensive deal is in about 2 weeks. They're going to meet again in Vienna in about 10 days in the hopes of sealing the deal. And it seems like there's been good progress that has been made. A number of the sticking points have been addressed. The issue over the Iranian heavy water reactor at Iraq has been fairly, seems like it's no longer really one of the key sticking points. Same thing with research and development at Fordo. The two key issues on the table right now seem to be enrichment on the one hand and sanctions relief on the other. The issue of enrichment, of course, has become one of the main issues that people talk about, the number of centrifuges. How many centrifuges should Iran have? How many does it actually need? If you listen to the Iranians, they need 190,000 SWU, whatever that is. And if you listen to folks in DC, they need about 1,500. So the gap that they had to bridge has been tremendous, but it seems like we're now in a position where the number on the table seems to be getting closer to what both sides can agree on. One of the main things that people keep talking about is, and I mentioned the 190,000 SWU, that is something that the supreme leader, the highest authority, the highest political authority in Iran, mentioned over the summer, and that freaked people out. People in DC were saying that said he's fixing all these impossible red lines that the negotiators won't be able to address. 190,000 SWU is about 190,000 first-generation centrifuges that Iran currently doesn't even have about 20,000 of. And the supreme leader came out and said, we need this number, and people didn't really think, is there a timeline that he's fixing for this? Is he saying we need 190,000 SWU right this instant, or do we need it at some point in time? What he was actually saying was, we need this number at some point, we need to get there. And our negotiators need to make sure that we have the ability at some point to get to this number to respond to the energy needs of the country. So if you read the text closely, if you look at it closely, you realize that there is actually some room for maneuver for the negotiating team. And that's extremely important because a lot of people are thinking, and that's, I think, is one of the key things that I hear from hardliners in the United States who don't want a deal, that the supreme leader is inherently opposed to a deal, that all this is for show, and he actually has made up his mind he wants a bomb. So, there's no point in talking to the Iranians because Rouhani really doesn't have the authority to get some sort of concession, to give any concessions. But that's not true. We've seen in the past year and a half that the supreme leader has essentially not only endorsed the negotiations, he's also given a mandate to the negotiating team. They wouldn't be where they are right now. They wouldn't be in Oman if he wasn't behind the team. And not only that, he is also, every time there has been criticism, and there has been a lot of criticism in Iran, there has been as much opposition to the nuclear negotiations in Iran as there has been in Washington. But he has come out in support of the team and said, look, I'm still behind the negotiators. I still want a deal. So, let's quiet down the criticism for a bit and let the negotiators do what they have to do. Doing that, he's actually positioning himself really well. On the one hand, he's saying, look, I still don't trust the United States. But on the other hand, he's saying, let's give this a shot. And I think that that's what we should do. We should also, in Washington, we should give a shot. We should allow the negotiators to reach a deal and to give it a chance, which is something that a lot of people are not willing to do. I want to talk a little bit about hardliners in Iran, because we talk about hardliners in the United States quite a lot. It's a small but very vocal group of people. A lot of them were behind the previous administration, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who became very famous all over the world, basically, for his very belligerent rhetoric, and other factions, too. Some of them benefit from the isolation, both political and economic, that Iran has been in for the past 8 to 10 years. And some of them are just wary of the United States and the West in general. But again, because the Supreme Leader is the highest authority in the country, he has been able to play a bit of a moderating force, to become an agent for, to give power to the moderates to pursue the negotiations. And that's not something that we associate the Supreme Leader with generally. We think of him as a hardliner. We think of him as someone who doesn't want change. He's not exactly the most progressive person when it comes to things related to culture, for instance, or human rights, women's rights, and other key issues. But in this particular topic, he has been fairly flexible so far. But because we're painting Iran with a broad brush, we're not really taking that into account. And people keep referring to him as the hardliner, who's not really willing to compromise. So I'm going to stop here, I think, and let you guys continue the discussion in Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariane.
Why is it legal to other countries to have nuclear weapons, but not legal to Iran to have similar weapons? Isn't that double standard?
Well, a few decades ago, various countries came together and decided to have this treaty called the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. And it is an inherently biased instrument, but it is an instrument that everybody agreed upon. And a number of countries signed it as nuclear weapon states, and a number of countries signed it as non-nuclear weapon states. So under the NPT, we have 5 nuclear weapon states: the United States, Russia, at the time the Soviet Union, China, France, and the UK. Everybody else who signed was non-nuclear weapon states, and Iran signed as a non-nuclear weapon state. When it did that, it knew what it was embarking on. The Iranians knew that they were going to give up their rights or their ability to have nuclear weapons under international law. And that's why there is so much controversy around the Iranian nuclear program. Yeah, I think citizens need to demand that their representatives know the issues they're voting on. And there is a lot of misinformation in Congress. And people this is a very hot topic right now. It's one of the very few issues where, whether you're Democrat or Republican or independent, you essentially have very similar views. There's very little difference of view from what I've seen, and again, Jamal can correct me. But I think that the most important thing is to demand that these people know that they're informed and they make informed decisions.
If the US continues to decommission aging nuclear plants and pursue renewable energy sources, would it encourage Iran to follow suit? If we start decommissioning nuclear power plants, would help Iran?
Well, I think that's a tricky question. I think that no. The short answer is no. More countries, in fact, are embarking on nuclear energy programs. That is especially the case in the Middle East. There are now 7 countries in the Middle East that are trying to get nuclear energy programs. Freudian slip. And that is not likely to change. Some of it stems from the fact that a lot of these countries are reliant on fossil fuel, and they believe that they need to diversify their energy sources. Another reason is that a lot of countries in the Middle East have water scarcity issues, and a really good way of addressing that still to this day is with nuclear energy. So in short, no, I don't think that if the United States starts to decommission nuclear power plants, other countries will necessarily follow suit. But I think that it would be, but I think that, this is a trend that is going to continue for a while.
What threat does Israel pose to Iran with nuclear power?
I'm assuming you meant with nuclear energy, with nuclear weapons.
Weapons, right?
Right. Well, I think it's a misperception. I think it would be misguided to say that the only threat to Iran is Israel. Iran is in a very unstable region. I think that a lot of people would think that, in Iran, if you ask a number of people, they will tell you that their country needs to prepare itself better. It needs to have a more reliable defense system. But a lot of the threats that Iran is actually that are very concrete to Iran right now are not nuclear weapons. They're not nuclear weapon based. They're threats from Sunni extremist groups by Iran's borders, in Pakistan on the one hand, in Iraq with ISIS and other similar groups on the other. I'm not sure that Israeli nuclear weapons are necessarily the biggest immediate threat to Iran. I think that Israel, some of Israel's policies are. I'm not sure that its nuclear weapons are, but that's just my personal view.
I assume most of you read the biography, so there's one question right out of the biography. Is nuclear weapons allowed and legal under Islamic law?
Wait for my book. It's a complicated question. It depends who you ask. I will give you the Iranian view, which is actually quite different from some other countries, and especially Sunni majority countries' views. The Iranian Supreme Leader is said to have issued a fatwa, that is a decree prohibiting nuclear weapons. Whether that prohibition is just the use of nuclear weapons or the possession and stockpiling of nuclear weapons as well is kind of unclear. But I have spoken to a number of Shia authorities in the past few years doing my research, and most of them, actually all of them, have said that on the use they are positive that it is prohibited by Shia jurisprudence. And one of the reasons they say this is that very similar to principles that we have in international law, that the indiscriminate killing of civilians and fighters is prohibited by the faith.
Israel has stated that Iran poses a threat to them, and they are committed to their destruction. As long as that belief is held, can we reach a point where the sanctions may impact the conversations or the relations?
Okay, I think there are several questions in there. Yes, Israel. Israelis, I think, do have a fear of a nuclear Iran and just generally of Iran, and it's well founded. The previous, the former President Ahmadinejad said a number of times that Israel would be wiped off the map, and that hasn't been well received in Israel for obvious reasons. So that's well founded. Now on sanctions, I'm not sure that is necessarily related to that. I mean, the sanctions issue is very complicated. There are various sanctions imposed by various entities. So in terms of U.S. sanctions, there are the ones for Iran's support of terrorist organizations and groups. There's the ones for human rights violations. There are the ones related to the nuclear issue. I think that the Israeli factor is definitely a component in there, and as long as the belligerent sort of rhetoric continues, I don't think there's going to be 100% normalization between the United States and Iran, but I'm not sure that sanctions are necessarily related to this.
If the deal is reached and the agreement is implemented, how will this affect the broader relations between Iraq, Syria, trade, and reconciliation? I'm not sure whose relations, as in the U.S. relations with Syria and Iraq, or Iranian relations with Syria and Iraq?
Broader question.
Iranian relations? Well, I think that the situation in Iraq really depends on ISIS. Iraq, unlike Syria, is a very concrete territorial integrity sort of issue for Iran. Syria is a strategic decision, right? Iran went into Syria because Assad has been an ally for Iran, and it saw it as in its interest. But Iran could choose to leave Syria, but Iran can't choose to ignore what is going on in Iraq, because ISIS actually poses a viable threat to Iranian borders. So I think that is sort of independent of the nuclear negotiations. That said, if there is a deal, and Iran and the US find a way to work together against ISIS, I think that will have huge consequences. On the one hand, because Iran is ready to put boots on the ground, so that'll actually be a relief for the U.S. It is already putting boots on the ground. In fact, the 2 Revolution Guards were buried yesterday, who died in Iraq fighting ISIS. And it would be good for Iran as well to be able to cooperate with the United States, and the 2 countries can complement each other in Iraq.
So, the New York Times has written that President Obama will negotiate with Iran without congressional approval. Do you know anything about this?
He didn't mention anything to me last time we spoke, but again, I'm reluctant to say anything more about this because we have a Congress expert who's sitting there and who's going to speak next. But I think that in a way he might have to. I think that the president has shown that he really wants a deal. I think it's something that he needs. His foreign policy agenda right now is not looking too great, and for the Democrats in 2016, it's not looking good. So I think that a deal with Iran would actually be quite a great achievement for him, for his entire administration. And if the Congress is going to be blocking a deal, is going to be blocking sanctions relief, and thus derailing the implementation of a deal, if there is a deal, then he will have to do exactly that.
Russia has agreed to take Iran's uranium and convert it into pods, something that might ease perceptions. Can you speak on this?
Yes, I can. So one of the issues in the negotiations has been the LEU stockpile, the low-enriched uranium stockpile that Iran has, and one of the solutions was to ship some of that abroad For the longest time, Iran was reluctant. One of the reasons being that Iran doesn't really trust, foreign powers, particularly Russia. There's a lot of mistrust between Iran and Russia, even though the two countries actually cooperate a lot. But a lot of times it's not because Iran chooses to, out of different options, it's because it's the only viable option. But anyway, so this seems to have been agreed upon, and it would actually make the striking a deal on enrichment generally a bit easier. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're managing to, we're seeing the gap between the two countries, the two parties, being narrowed.
In the current negotiations, is energy conservation on the table?
Okay, another easy question. Well, I think that, again, Iran is going to continue its nuclear program regardless of other energy considerations at this point. The plan that they seem to have at this point is for another 7 to 8 reactors to be built in the next 20 years or so. And I think that, diversifying energy sources is going to be a big step that the country needs to take along with others in the region, but I'm not sure that it's going to have an impact on Iran's nuclear program as of yet.
Does the West need Iran in their effort to contain ISIL? If yes, does this change the dynamics of the nuclear negotiations?
Yes and yes. Yes, I think that the West needs Iran in the fight against ISIS. As I said previously, Iran is one of the only countries that is willing to put boots on the ground. It is a country that knows Iraq very well, and that has the same interests in Iraq as the United States right now. Israel has clearly said that Prime Minister Netanyahu and others in his cabinet have said that they actually view a partition of Iraq positively. Iran doesn't see a partition of Iraq positively, and neither does the United States. So their strategic goals are aligned here. In terms of the nuclear negotiations, I think that is certainly the fear that a lot of hardliners on all sides, whether it's in Iran, in the United States, in Israel, and Saudi Arabia have, that we would get a quote-unquote bad deal because people are just so willing to move on and to start, working to fight ISIS. And but it seems like so far the topic has been discussed on the sidelines of the negotiations, but neither party has really wanted to bring it into the negotiations. Foreign Minister Zarif has said that he doesn't have the mandate to address the issue of ISIS. And on this side, Secretary Kerry as well has said that that's not what this is about, that they're just going to discuss the nuclear negotiations. And in part, I think it is to help appease their domestic constituencies that this is just about the nuclear negotiations, that there's not going to be a bad deal, there are not going to be too many concessions just because the two sides want to work together in Iraq.
Another one Ram had trouble reading, so I'm going to read it. It is my understanding that sanctions have never achieved anything except hardship to the middle and lower levels of the recipient countries, except possibly in South Africa. Are sanctions in Iran having any positive effect?
Well, that's tricky. As someone who has family in Iran, who goes to Iran, I can tell you that sanctions do really have a negative impact on people's lives. My parents who recently moved back from Paris tell me that they pay more for chicken in Iran than they did in Paris, and yet the average Iranian doesn't make as much as the average Parisian, needless to say. So it's really changed the standards of living in Iran, and it has empowered a small faction. There are factions that are, and they're the ones who, not surprisingly, oppose negotiations, who oppose a deal, because they benefit from the sanctions. That said, I also do think that sanctions not the entire story, but they did play a role in the election of President Rouhani. Certainly the 2009 elections and other domestic factors contributed to that, but the economic hardship that people were facing was the major platform on which Rouhani ran and won the elections. So I'm not sure that, I wouldn't say they've had a positive impact, but I think that saying that they're 100% useless or 100% all important in shaping policies is not exactly giving the entire picture. I think that it falls somewhere in between.